Welcome to Dulles. We're a community of faith that embodies the love of Jesus for the good of our neighbor and renewal of our world. We're so glad you're listening.
Welcome to this series that's going to take us through a big part of this winter. We're calling it Story. And I'm going to just propose right up front that stories, of course we understand what stories are. We go to movies and we read books and we understand the concept of story, and yet I'm not sure we understand the consequential nature of story playing out every day in our lives. Stories are a currency. They're a language that everyone speaks, and you need story. You can't survive. You actually cannot thrive or function in this world without story, without utilizing story, without communicating story. You need stories to understand the world around you, to understand other people, the people in your life. You have to have story as a currency, as a language to understand yourself. You cannot understand God apart from story. God cannot be known if you try to know him through data or instructions or rules outside of story. I just did a quick search. I don't know why I picked Stephen King, just like what authors that have sold a lot of books. Stephen King has sold 400 million copies, 400 million books. When you think about the investment that we make into this idea of story, and I think we label or categorize story as sort of entertainment, like, yeah, on vacation I read a book. Or when we have a kind of a slow weekend, we'll go to the movie theater. But your life is a story, and we're going to define that and describe that, not in terms of a metaphor. We'll say that often, like, oh, you're living like a story right now, or this part of my life is a story. This isn't hyperbole. By definition, you are living a story, whether you know it or you like it or not. This is in some ways a primary definition of what our lives are about. In 2023, fiction books sold for a price of $10.8 billion, just fiction alone. I looked up some brands because story is kind of, I started a film festival. Some of you are a big part of the film festival that happens in Reston and Tyson's Corner every October, the Washington West Film Festival. And when I was just kind of creating it, I came up with the tagline because story was so important to me, and just understanding its thread and the glue that story is for life. The mantra, the tagline, story can change the world. And just this week, I've never really paid attention to how many. I know some brands use story to describe their company or their products. I didn't know how many. I'm going to just give you a few this morning. Chevrolet has used the tagline, "Every journey begins with a story." A better way to tell your story is Squarespace. Airbnb, more than just a story, it's a lifestyle. Start your morning story is Kellogg's message to us about why we really need their cereal. It's amazing how many brands are onto this innate awareness that we have that story has a big part. It's not just something that entertains us once in a while. It's actually a fundamental part of life. There are expensive brands, Chanel, every fragrance tells a story. And then there's just everyday brands, Campbell's Soup, from our story to yours. We consume story, not occasionally, not just on weekends. We do this daily. When you go to work on a Monday morning and somebody asks you about your weekend, you may answer with just a fact. Sometimes we do that, but often you tell a story. Your answer, your response is actually a story. Your life, as it turns out, is a story. So what makes a story? What is a story? How do we actually define a story, and what makes a great story? Influences for me There are many, and there's too many to name, just different movie directors and authors. John Ortberg, he's been a pastor and teacher for many years. He really understands story well. He's a great storyteller. He's really influenced me a lot. Robert McKee is very well known in Hollywood. Speaking of LA, this is his book, Story. This is considered the authority on story writing, script writing. This is used in film study classes, literary classes, everywhere. He's a screenwriter in Hollywood, and he has been called the world's story authority, the most sought-after story authority in the world. And so I want to use some of these things that I've just kind of processed over the years and put in front of you so we can talk about this. This is going to be a framework for us in this series, and we're going to get into the mechanics of what makes a story. And this has everything to do with how your story interlaces with God's story. So, elements of a great story. Because we've all experienced bad stories or boring stories or gotten up and walked out or put the book down. Because what we're searching for in the moment, what we latch onto, what emotionally ties us to a great story is just not connecting. Or maybe the story is just not well told. So what makes a great story? The first element of a great story, and this is going to sound simple, it's profound, it's very, very important to have a great story, is every story has a character, a person with a want. Every story has a protagonist, a main character with an object of desire. And if you don't have this, you don't have a story. You just have kind of a teacher giving information, or you're reading data. When you have a person who wants something or has a dream, or they want to overcome something, or there's something in their past that they're trying to finally bury, or they're trying to get the girl, or the job, or rob the bank. You learn in the beginning of the story, oh, that's their want, that's their desire, that's the object of their desire. Well, you have the beginning of what could be a very good story. We sometimes, growing up in church, the way I grew up in church, it's so easy to get this crazy, false, warped idea that if you follow God, if you commit your life to God, you're not supposed to want anything. Wanting things is like material or vain. You actually were made by God to want. You were made with desires. The beginning of Mark's gospel account of Jesus' life, tells us that the very first question Jesus asks is, what do you want? It's fascinating to me that one of our gospels begins Jesus' story by asking the question, what do you want? God knows we have desires. Some of our desires are warped, some are broken, some are super healthy, but we're people who desire. He made us this way. Amy and I did so many road trips with the girls when they were younger. I mean, I can't even count them. To the beach every summer. We would drive to Florida a lot. And I had this thing where we just have to get there as fast as we can. And so driving to Florida, I don't know how many times we did this. I came up one day, I made a family announcement. Hey, we're going to make one stop per state. Once in Virginia, once in each of the Carolinas, Georgia, and Florida. Run in, use the bathroom. We're going to order food as fast as we can. Back in the car, and we're at it. And one day, the girls and Amy, they just kind of unloaded on me in the car after we made our stop. They're like, you did it again. And I realized, wow, they're right. And I saw the pattern. We would get in line real quick after going to the bathroom, and we'd place our food order. And I would, often went last. And I'd place my order, and the person taking my order is about to, hit final or enter, and I'd change my mind. I'd say, no, that's not what I want. And so in the car, you guys just many times you did it again. Oh my gosh, Dad, it's so annoying. You want us to get there fast, but when it comes to food, you don't know what you want. And it's super annoying if you're waiting for somebody who just can't make up their mind. They don't know what they want. Is there anything more irritating? But man, in life, the worst place you can be in life is not knowing what you want. Not knowing what you want in your relationships, what you want your outcome to be, what you want your life to be about. So that's our series goal. We're going to spend time in the weeks ahead uncovering our stories, drilling down on what is a story, what's a great story, what is my story, what is your story, and how are our stories, how is your story inextricably linked to God's story, which it is. Whether you knew that or not, or know it or not, whether that's something that you walk around consciously thinking of, your story is inextricably linked to the story that is God, His desire. All right, the second element of any great story is conflict. If you sit down to read a book or you start a movie and it just takes a while, you're well into it and there's just no conflict, you're going to get bored. You may think the characters are beautiful or the scenery is attractive. You are going to lose interest if this character who has a desire or a dream or they're trying to overcome something doesn't run into an initial conflict. Every great story has conflict, obstacles, barriers that stand between the protagonist and the object of their desire, what they want. Sometimes the conflicts, for good or bad, actually alter what the character wants. And we'll get into that more in the series and how that relates to God's story and your story and mine. There are, and Robert McKee talks about the three different types of conflict that we face. The first is inner. It's intrapersonal, he calls it. It's a conflict within yourself. It's something that has been haunting you or something that is nagging at you or something that you feel like you can't overcome. The second conflict is interpersonal. It's between you and others, you and another person or you and other people. And I would say most of the movies you watch are about that kind of conflict. That's the conflict we tend to see is with the person that's opposing the protagonist. The third type is extrapersonal, and this is forces beyond. It's really even hard to define at the beginning of the book or the story or the movie what the force is, but these are large, powerful forces beyond yourself. In the Hunger Games, the conflict is really with the government. I mean, ultimately, it's with the government. You could even say that about Harry Potter. They're very similarly structured stories. You could say, well, it's interpersonal with Voldemort. I mean, it is with Voldemort, but the forces, the conflict are just much larger than one entity. It's like this evil. And the evil even seeps in Harry Potter into the government. Now, there's a hidden core element to story that we're going to talk about in this series. We're going to come back to this a lot. And this might be unsettling for you. In fact, when I was learning this, it took me so long to get my head around this. I mean, I could understand it, but just to accept it. And you may not like this about stories. This is actually an element that makes stories great because this is true of life. Every great story deals with this reality. No one gets what they want. No one gets the story they want. I'm not talking about outcome. I'm talking about obstacles, the conflict. No one gets the script. You know, we've got that dream college, and I'm going to get accepted there, and then I'm going to get that job right out of college, and I'm going to fall in love, and we're going to have the best marriage. We're just never going to have conflict. I mean, it's just so silly. Amy and I heard just recently about a couple who've never argued. You know, they've been married for so long, and they've got they're amazing people. They're friends of my parents. And that's a story that their hometown tells, and, you know, it's just, they've never had an argument after, 50-some years. And Amy and I actually, we laughed about it like, oh my gosh, we're on the opposite end of that spectrum. Like, holy moly, and we ended up feeling a little sorry for them, actually, because conflict is a part of life and learning and growing. You don't get the story you want. No one does. And this is why when we see this element in a movie or in a great book, we get hooked in, we're sucked in. We spend a Saturday night, part of our weekend, in a dark movie theater. Why do we do that? You're sitting on a beach, your family's playing on jet skis or whatever they're doing, and you're sitting on the beach with a novel, looking at white pages with black text, and you just keep turning the it's because we relate. In real life, we know no one gets the story they want. And there's something about the character and the obstacles or the barriers or the challenges that pull us in emotionally. We start to see ourselves. We're living vicariously through this person because this is real life. No one's story follows the script or plays out the way they want. All right, let's think about Maverick in Top Gun, the original Top Gun. What did Maverick want? What was the object of his desire? You can just yell this out. Anybody, just, what's your memory? What's your thought? What did Maverick want? To be the best pilot in the world, the best fighter pilot, Top Gun pilot, which made him the best, would make him the best pilot. Okay, so we kind of get that early in the story. We relate to, there's this dream or there's this drive, this passion. And then he starts running into conflicts, and this is what pulls us in. And by the way, I'm going to use some kind of lighthearted movie examples here because if I use Schindler's List or something really sobering, it's obvious. In those stories, it's more obvious. We learn faster this consistent element of storytelling when we sometimes look at more lighthearted or comedy kind of stories. When you look at Top Gun, immediately, soon into the story, he's running into conflicts. Some of them are interpersonal, like the other pilots don't like Maverick. They think he's cocky. There's this kind of arguing happening in the locker rooms kind of thing. He has conflict with his commanders, the naval commanders. But when you pay attention, Maverick's biggest conflict is interpersonal. It's intrapersonal. It's inner. It's inside of himself. Let's look at not Harry Potter, Home Alone. I started with the wrong H. Home Alone, a lot of you probably just watched this movie last month. This is like a yearly deal for us. It's the silliest story. How can you explain that millions of people every Christmas spend time watching a story they already know? They've watched it. They watched it 12 months ago. When a family gets on an airplane and flies to another continent and they leave their young son at home alone. It's the silliest thing. And yet, so many of us watch it every year. It's one of the best Christmas stories. What is it that Kevin wants? Early into the story, we know pretty quickly. He thinks he's going to love life without his family. Jumping on the bed here, we end it with this picture because that's what Kevin is just picturing for the rest of his life. And he quickly runs into conflict. And the conflicts are what attach us to the story. As ridiculous as this premise is, we get pulled in because Kevin suddenly is dealing with things he wasn't expecting. Being alone, home, at night alone, old man Marley. And then the ultimate conflict, we'll get to ultimate conflicts here in just a minute, which Robert McKee calls the crisis of the story, the wet bandits in this case. Another element to a great story, and I've alliterated this here to kind of help with C's, the letter C, to help us remember this. Every good story eventually gets to a crisis moment that results in a choice that the main character has to make. It's the ultimate choice of the movie, of the book, of the story being told at work. When it's a great story and everybody's pulled into it and you're attached to it emotionally, the story eventuates at a crisis moment. It's the ultimate conflict. Of all the conflicts in the story, this is the ultimate conflict, the crisis, that leads to the ultimate choice that reveals the character. It reveals the person's character. And this is the stuff that starts to attach to God's story and him presenting himself to us as a story. Every great story is the journey about that character's, and I'm saying character here instead of protagonist, about that character's character. Every great story is the story of that character's character being revealed. All right, so stay with me on this. Robert McKee is just so good at explaining the difference between characterization and character. Lazy writers, poor storytellers, and we see this even coming out of Hollywood, will build their story, the protagonist is defined and described really around characterization. Characterization are the external qualities. It's what you can see by looking at someone. You can see visually by watching them. They're tall, their ethnicity. You can even tell externally sometimes if someone's educated or not. This is characterization, and lazy storytelling focuses on characterization. The stories that pull us in emotionally don't prioritize characterization, they prioritize character. This is the inner, the unseen, the inner part of a character or a person. And this is always revealed through the choices they make. Our choices define our character. The decisions you make, the choices you choose reveal who you really are. And we innately know this. And so when we're watching a story unfold and conflict starts to happen, we're really watching subconsciously, on some emotional level, we're watching for how they're going to respond. Are they going to run in fear? Are they going to lie and blame someone else? Are they going to choose themselves over others? Or are they going to be heroic? Is there going to be integrity in this story? Is there something in their choosing that might inspire me? Because I'm actually facing conflict. And then, we're not going to spend time on this today. We'll come back to it in future weeks. The fourth element of a great story is this climatic moment that results in the resolution. Now, why stories are so crucial to you and me, whether you're aware of this, whether you've thought about it or heard this before or not, chances are this is kind of new for us. Story is so essential to you thriving in life, understanding the world around you, understanding people, understanding yourself, connecting to God, really connecting, actually connecting to Him. Story is so essential because you are actually living a story. It's not a metaphor. This isn't hyperbole. That sometimes your life gets dramatic and kind of looks like a story. You are living, by definition, a story. You have a desire. You have potential. And you run into conflicts. You face conflicts. And there are choices that you have to make that reveal who you really are. When I thought that story was just this kind of man-made element that, a long time ago somebody was like, I just had an idea. I think I've created a story. And then it became kind of this like the iPhone. It's this new thing that humans are using, stories. I didn't understand that story was designed by God and it's a part of creation. It's a part of how we interact. You can't live outside of story. And that you live a story. I used to struggle young in my faith with why does God do this? It's almost like we're puppets. We're playing in His play. We're following His script. And why the conflict? Why the hurt and challenge in marriage? Why is parenting? Sometimes, and we can kind of chuckle about it on a Sunday morning, but why is parenting like such a nightmare sometimes? Why the bullying, and how can humans treat other humans the way we do? We talk often here about how hurt people end up hurting people. And if God's the script writer, why did He work this in? It just seems mean or like this cruel kind of deal. When actually, and it took me a while in my faith to understand, we introduce conflict. We chose conflict. We introduced the world to brokenness, selfishness. The truth about God is he chose to enter our story. God could have left like, oh my gosh, that's a nightmare happening on that planet. I'm going to go over to this part of the universe and start over. Because of his character, because of the internal qualities of our God, he chose to pursue us and to actually enter our story. John tells us in the Christmas narrative of the incarnation that Jesus came and lived and he made his dwelling among us. And so enter Jesus into the story. This might fascinate you. Of all the major world religions, none of them are presented as a story except the story of Jesus. When you look at Buddha or Confucius, Muhammad, they are framed around instructional teaching, really almost data. God, from beginning to end, gives us his view of life, his interaction with us through a story that he chooses to enter. He becomes a character. He becomes the human, the only human who can actually live out the desire of every human. This is why we need Jesus. He actually did it. Paul calls him the second Adam. He did what humans were supposed to do, image God in our creation, our managing of companies or organizations, our interactions with others, the relationships we have, what we create. We were made in the image of the Creator. We're supposed to be creating beauty that points people to him. This is your greatest desire. We talk about this often here at Dulles. Jesus is the only human who actually fulfilled it. But we get to take his character onto us to replace our broken character with his character. Jesus in Matthew 26 is facing this agonizing. You look at the conflicts with the Pharisees and Rome and people who deny him or choose selfishness. It leads to the ultimate conflict. The crisis of the story is the cross. And he enters the Garden of Gethsemane. This is in Matthew 26:36. And he takes his disciples to this garden and he says to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. The context is he's probably going to be praying loud. We know this is very emotional for him. We see that here and in the other Gospels. Then he takes 3 of the disciples, Peter and James and John, with him a little further. He's like, I need you guys praying with me. His heart is just, the word here is overwhelmed. He said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. My sorrow may kill me. Stay here and keep watch with me. And then we know, when you're understanding story and the way stories are told, you start to see yourself in the characters of the story. The disciples keep falling asleep. They're tired. They don't understand what's going on. I see myself so much in these disciples. Jesus went on a little further and bowed down with his face to the ground, praying. Now remember, conflict. How do we respond? What's our response to opposition, to obstacles, to barriers? With this framework, now we're looking at Jesus while he's facing conflict. How's he going to respond? My Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. Jesus, yes, of course, the torture of the cross is in front of him. I mean, it's horrific. Still today, experts tell us Roman crucifixion is like the worst form of capital punishment ever devised. Of course, that's on Jesus' mind, but what he's dreading is taking the broken character, the selfish choosing that Scripture calls sin, taking that, lifting it off all humans, and taking it onto himself. And it's just overwhelming to Jesus. And here he is in this crisis moment. And what does he do? What does the protagonist do here? Yet, I want your will to be done, not mine. And what was God's desire from the beginning? What's the object of his desire? That we would be rescued from our brokenness. That we would be reconnected back to God, to the heart of God. And Jesus in his character chooses the ultimate desire over what he wants. I've got another reason why story matters so much to you. The first was that you're living a story. You can't help it. You might think your story is boring. You might not want anyone to ever know your story. You might think your story is the most important story in the world. You may have kind of an arrogant, narcissistic view of your story. Whether you like it or not, that you're living a story, or what you think others will, how they'll react to your story, you're living one. And the second reason that story is so crucial for us understanding the world and the people around us, the people we're married to, our children and our coworkers, and understanding God, it's so crucial because God has entered your story. He's come into your broken world. He's become the protagonist hero, with the character to be the character when you and I don't have the character, to be what we really want. And see, this requires humility. This requires a lot of humility and surrender when we care, like, my life is a story, and there are wants and desires, and I want to image beauty. I want to be known for creating beauty in friendships and with people and in the world and in my business and my work. There are qualities in me that are so broken I can't overcome. I don't have enough courage. I don't have enough inner fortitude or knowledge or smarts to overcome every part of my brokenness. And so the humility required for you and me is to realize at some point, you know what? I'm a character in the story, in my story, but he's the protagonist. I need his character to replace my character. Where I'm weak, where I'm selfish, where I let my guilt define me, regrets from my past define me, I need his character and what he's done for me to truly define me. Jesus came to face your ultimate conflict, to give you what you really dream and desire, to image God in his beauty, to be reconnected to the source of creation. Our band's going to come. I'm going to have you guys come prepared to close out our time here. And I just want to put one of my favorite texts in Scriptures, Philippians 2. Alton, when I went over some of this message with Alton a few days ago, Alton and Lou. And Alton's like, Philippians 2 is my, and I knew this. It's my favorite text in all of Scripture. And I want to just put this here in front of us as we begin this series and we look ahead at the weeks ahead. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, Paul tells us. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself. Not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of the others. Like, why would we do this? Why would I elevate others above myself and my own desires and dreams? Because life only works, Paul says, in relationship, just functioning as a human being, when we have the mindset, the heart, and the character of Jesus. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being the very nature God, Jesus was God. He did not consider equality with the Father something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, and this is all in the choices he makes, and he makes these choices confronting the conflict of humans, our brokenness. He stands by his character and he's true to himself. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, someone who would serve us. Jesus, the protagonist hero, becomes our servant to free us, to break us out of the prison we're in, to wash our feet. As the servant, he literally washes the dirt and scum and crap and brokenness off of us. And being found in appearance, as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, and this is the resolution, this is how the story ends, the Father exalted him. Jesus sits at the right hand of the Father. And now he intercedes for you and me. He offers intercession for you and me as we are journeying through life, choosing with character, with integrity, more and more the way of Jesus, inviting his character, asking, being desperate for his character to replace our brokenness. We're going to close with this worship, this song, and you can sit, you can stand. I'm just imploring with you to allow Jesus to become the character of your life. Stop trying to be the character. You will run out of gas. You will ultimately, in all of your frustrations with other people and how people can behave, you'll ultimately end up most frustrated with yourself. Because there's something so broken in the human condition we can't solve. We cannot ourselves solve reconnecting back to the beauty of our Creator. We just can't. And so we step aside into this, what feels like, it just sounds awful to say, this secondary role in our story, and allow him to become the protagonist, but that's the only way we actually become the hero and the creator of beauty that we desire. It's the object of our desire. Jesus, would you become the central figure of our story? You literally, physically came into our world to be this character. And now we invite you to become the defining character inside of us, inside of me. Replace my weakness, my guilt and regrets, what I'm just incapable of overcoming. Replace that inner person and that character with your own character. Define me, redefine me as beautiful, with all of your potential in me. Do that for us, we pray, Jesus. And we give you this month ahead, this series ahead. We worship you now. Let's stand together.